Manliness, the lost art. This is a series called The Basics of the Home, 4-part series. This one starts it all off with manliness, the lost art. It is interesting to look around today and see that men are rarely ever men. They're rather girly, and you can thank our society for doing that. But instead of it being, well, what should we do? Let's turn and see what God has told us to do. First thing we're going to look at is how to act like a man. In 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8, he says this: if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So, then we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and see what it says. Verse 18. First Corinthians chapter 16 verse 13. Excuse me. Be on guard, stand firm in the faith, be men of courage, be strong, do everything in love. All right, so let's take a look at that. The first thing is provide, or you have denied your faith in God. God has designed man to be able to produce. You have time. You have time to be able to do whatever you want with it. One of the things you can do with it is to provide for yourself, for your family, even provide so much that you could save up for when you can no longer provide, or save up so that you could have a greater life, provide even more. One man can provide so much that thousands could live off of that one man. And that's the way God's designed it. Those are the rules. And here's what he says about that. If you don't work, you shouldn't eat. Isn't that interesting? In other words, we're designed to work. We're designed to be people who produce, especially men. And God has set us up to be the provider for the family. This is why God reveals himself as male, because he provides for us and he spiritually guides us. God intends for you to provide because you have needs, you have to live, you have to have survival, you have to have shelter, clothing, food, etc. And he is giving you the ability to do that. The second thing we see is that you're to be a man of courage and to be strong. You're to be men who can stand there and take the worries of the world and do so as some of the examples that were given to us, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were people who went into the lion's den trusting in God. Into the burning fire trusting in God. They walked in there knowing that they were going to be consumed, but walked in there with trust in God. Now, we have to go into the world every day and trust in God. And in order to do that, we have to know that we're going to be turning to God for the example of how to be courageous and strong. And he's given us many, many, many examples throughout the Bible. All of the great men of the Bible were wealthy and beyond imagination. Abraham and Job and Jacob and Solomon and David, all of them had accomplished much. And remember this: what one man can do, another can do. Also, we're to see that we are to do everything in love. Now, the world defines love differently than God does. God defines love as doing what is best for the other person, no matter what it costs you. This is why many marriages fail, because people say, "Well, I just fell out of love, and I just don't have that feeling anymore." Well, love is not a feeling. Love is an action. When you love someone, you do what is right for them. You do it even though it's going to cost you what you already have, because you love that person. Another word is meek, and that's an interesting word, because in the word meek, it doesn't mean weak. It actually means I have a sword. The word comes from this, the Hebrew word comes from this word. I have a sword, yet I'm going to leave it sheathed, even though I want to pull it out. Be able to, like this picture here, handling a bird without hurting the bird, even though you have the power to destroy it. You have the power, because you're a man, to build or to destroy. To build is the way of God. To destroy is the way of Satan. As men, we have to decide who we are and what we're going to do. The second part is that as a man, you're to love your wife and children. Let's take a look at what God said about that. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, he says this: Husbands, in the same way be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you in the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Now, notice what he says there. Be considerate as you live with your wives. How do you learn to be considerate? And it is a learned response. And it means to consider the other person. Well, a man ought to be able to be in control of his actions and his feelings, and ought to be able to handle himself in situations that seem beneath him. It seems like he doesn't want to have to deal with it. But a man, a real man, can handle those because he has learned to be considerate. Well, you know what that means. That means that he's going to do things for his wife, even though she could do them for herself. There's an interesting little booklet that I read, and I took it and rewrote it in today's language, but it's the Rules of Civility, written by George Washington. There's 110 rules of how to talk to people, how to walk with your mate, how to greet someone else of greater or lesser importance than yourself, how to stand in front of them, when you're walking down a hall, who do you give way to when being with others, how do you allow them to speak at times? It's very interesting, because it was written when he was only 12 years old. Now, you know what that means? That means his parents had already taught him all of that and spent great time with him to make sure that he was a kind and considerate person. And I would imagine his wife greatly appreciated that. Being considerate to your wife is more than just opening the door or just pulling back the chair. It's understanding who she is and why she's the way she is. Now remember, it said too that you're to be someone that is for them, this love, this doing things in love. You're doing it because you're for them. Well, being a gentleman, being gentle, a gentleman never goes out of style. Everyone loves that kind of person. Also notice it says you're to respect her as a weaker partner. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? In fact, we have a whole movement of thought where the woman is to be equal with the man. Equal, yes. But the bodies aren't equal. They're made totally different. In fact, that's the way God designed them. He designed them to be totally different, yet compatible and to fit together, to, to complete each other. And it doesn't mean that a man is necessarily stronger than a woman. There are some women that are physically capable of doing more than a man. No, it means that a woman is different from a man. She runs things different. Her emotions control her many times. And the way that she processes things are different from a man. That's why God designed it where the children were to have a man and a woman in the household. And so the child falls over and gets hurt, and it starts crying, and the woman goes, oh, oh, and she runs over and she picks up the child. It's okay, it's okay. And the father, he would run over and he'd say, get up, walk it off, you're okay, come on. And the children need both of those things to be able to grow up straight, to be able to grow up correctly. And so when you're thinking of your mate, your wife, you have to respect her because she's doing it differently than you are. And the way she's doing it is going to move her differently, make her respond differently. So you have to make sure that you allow that. She is the weaker. In fact, there are over 1,200 changes, not changes, there are over 1,200 differences between the man and the woman. And when you talk about that, you can see why the woman would be different from the man, and the man has to understand he can't just walk off and leave her when she's having more difficulties, and he has to be there to help her. A third thing is that a man needs to manage his family well. It has to be that the children actually obey him. They actually obey him, and he's going to make sure that they obey his wife. That's part of that respecting her as a weaker person. They may not can physically handle that child, but a man can. Children need to, and here's the way they do it. The man spends time with the children, and the children respect the man. He talks to them as they need him to talk to them. They need to learn how to speak and how to react and how to think. They're going to watch him for everything. I remember when I was a kid and the phone would ring. The phone would be down the hall. We don't have it like today where everybody has a cell phone. It would actually be down the hall and stuck to a little cord there in a little, what we called the telephone cubby hole. And you go down there and you answer the phone. And some people will say, hello, hello, and the woman would answer, hello. And so on the other end, it would be their husband's boss. Oh, Tom. Oh, just a minute. Let me see if Rick is in. And she turns around, looks at her husband. Her husband says, no. And he goes out the back door, and she says, you know what, Tom? Rick just left. And the children hear this, and they see this, and they see the lies and deceptions. And that they can't have from the parents, because then they're not going to obey the parents. They're going to lie and deceive them. It's real important how we treat our children and how we have them obey, because they know we deserve that obedience. We've shown them who we are and what we do. We've been considerate to our wife. We've been respectful to her, and we have provided and managed well. And the wife is going to say, hey, kids, you act your father right now. He doesn't deserve that. And fathers are so important to the family. Did you know that they say that without the father being in the family, all kinds of problems come to it? From homosexuality to schizophrenia, all kinds of problems, mental problems, because they're only getting one side of the design that God had for parents. It's very important that the man be in the family and a part of the family, because proper respect must be there. Now look, respect cannot be demanded. Respect has to be earned. It should be earned in the fashion in which man does things and they see him do. I remember my father going out, because he was a lineman, worked on the wires, making sure people had electricity, and the storms would be raging, and my father would be out there in it. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was out there in it, doing his best to get the power back on for everyone. And he would come home and he'd be wet and tired, or he would slip and burn a pole, and he'd have splinters all in him. This built respect in us because he had provided for his family. How important that is. And it has to be that the children then look at their father with this respect of what he has done for them. They look at it from now on. And as they grow older, they gain in respect for their father. Also, that we're to stand for God. Now, how can you do these things that you're supposed to do before God without standing for God? And your children need to see that you stand for God. Let's take a look at a couple of scriptures here. 2 Timothy 3:17 says this. So, all scripture is God-breathed and is used for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. What is a good work? Good is from God. So when a man does good, he is acting on behalf of God to advance the cause of God. If he does evil, he's advancing the cause of Satan. Look how important it is for a man to be a man. What kind of man? A man of God. Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians 15 and 58. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 58. Therefore, my dear brothers, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Well, that's some pretty powerful stuff there. Let's take a look and unpack that. Men must be thoroughly equipped to do good. Where do we get this knowing how to do what is good and what is right? God was not going to keep it from you, and he made sure you would have it in his, put it in his word. Now, he didn't put it in 1, 2, 3, 4, because you know what you do? You would do those and then wouldn't do anything else, or try to fit something in between so that you could have a loophole in the law. But what he did was he gave you dialogues, stories, examples, commands, edicts, laws, all these things so that you can be the man you're supposed to be. And in so being that man, you would be equipped to be a good man, to be a godly man, to be a man who would work being made in the image of God in the world God made for his will to be done, and made it with the laws he designed. So he was a loving father, just as men are supposed to be, in that he makes sure you know exactly what to do to please him. Can't beat that. That's God's word. Now notice also that you're to stand firm, letting nothing move you. Well, what do you mean by that? When you exercise with resistance. When you use your muscles with resistance, you grow stronger. Man grows from the wind that blows against him. A man is to stand strong in the storms. And then when the storm is over, he's a better man for it. We're not supposed to ask God, oh, please take this from me, but rather, help me learn how to handle this so I don't have to deal with it again. If your problem is that you want to steal, and you learn how to not steal by getting over that desire and acting correctly, you don't ever have to worry about stealing again. But if you don't, you're going to find yourself in jail someday because it never stays the same. You got to steal more and more and more. If you can't stand the way someone talks to you and you're not going to allow it, and in your mind you keep saying, shut up, shut up, shut up, sooner or later you'll do something about it. And then you'll be in trouble. You have to be able to control yourself and learn that control. And the way that is done is through the problem, not taking you out of the problem. So stand firm for God. What does that mean? Well, when you talk to your boss, or as a boss, when you talk to your employees, how you handle your money, how you say your word, give your word for something, how you handle yourself out in society. You're standing there in line, and there are other people, an old lady behind you, and she has 4 or 5 items, and you say, please, will you please go first? And then you have to control the urges when she pulls out a checkbook and writes a check instead of using cash or a debit card or something like that. And it's taking even longer than you ever thought. And you don't just do it because she's a beautiful young woman. You do this because you're respecting her. And that puts you through the storm, and you're able to stand firm and become something greater. The same with your wife. As your wife says, are you listening to me? And you say, yes, dear, and you're not even paying any attention. The reality is, she's hungry for it. She married you for a reason. Be a man. Listen to her. Listen to what she needs and try to help her with it. Do that so that she'll come to be able to depend on you and depend on you being the man. And then last, give yourself fully to the work of the Lord. You've got to be involved in God's work. You need to go to church. You need to do what is right. You need to be a person who is involving yourself in God. You need to be leading your family to God. If you're not leading your family to God, you are leading them away from God. And that's it. There's no in between. You have to give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because if you give yourself partially to anything else, you won't be fully God's man. Well, That's pretty important, isn't it? Take a look at how we have looked at manliness. We're not to be like the world. The world can't think that way. They can't think that way because it's from God. It's not from the world. You can't get it from within yourself. You can't sit there with your fingers in a circle and your legs crossed and go, and find who you are supposed to be on the inside. It can't come from you. It has to come from God. There are three truths about truth. Number one, truth cannot come from man. It can't, because man can't live long enough, can't experience enough, can't travel far enough, can't search far enough, can't know the end of his own actions, which may not happen till for generations. There were people who bought slaves and used them and did not think about the fact that they're stealing those men's production, and ultimately their children, their actions destroyed their children and the lives of those slaves. They thought they were doing what is right, and they weren't. And then number two, truth must come from somewhere else. It can't come from man, so it must come from somewhere else. Somewhere outside of man. Now look, not from man, then it can't come from man's books. It has to come from outside of man. And then number three, God freely gives his truth. And why not? He's the one who set all the laws. When he created the world, he created the laws for man to be a man. And because of that, we need to turn to him to find out how we're to act. It's only logical. Not only just logical, but boy, it's right and makes us the right kind of men before our God and before the world. Women hunger for a manly man. Men hunger to know another good man. Children long to have good men guide them. And if you won't, they'll find one. And if he isn't good, that man's going to guide them into evil. Well, that's our story today. And it's straight from God. Stand up and be a man. Thank you.